was a argument that architecture was going to become a paperless profession, and I believe that's thrown out. Architecture is about where ideas come from, whether it's a model or you discover an idea through working a program, digital program, or you're sketching. I do all of it, and our practice does all that because it's about ideas. Why consider that the only avenue one can take is digital when you may discover a wonderful idea through a sketch? When you sketch and you draw, it tells a bit about yourself, but also the soul of what your idea is. Whereas sometimes when you go digital, you're looking at, Rhino, or you're looking programs like that. It becomes so realistic, and that seems to be the obsession. How realistic can you make this rendering?
Right.
Well, if one, to me, I don't buy that idea. I am convinced that it's good to work with those programs if they're trying to solve something, but I believe ideas are embedded in sketching.
Thank you, everybody, for all the support on these videos of the foundation. The response from the community has been absolutely amazing. We really ask you if there's more people that you want us to interview, if there's more questions, we'd love for you to leave them in the comments. And of course, if you want to share this video, we would absolutely appreciate that. And our guest today is Lorcan O'Herlihy at Lorcan O'Herlihy Architects, founded in 1994. LOHA prides itself in engaging in the complexities of the urban landscape and embracing the architect's role as a catalyst for change. Lorcan, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate you sitting down with us.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
So if we just jump right in, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. I was born in Dublin, Ireland. So I'm an Irish-born American. So one calls me an Irish-American architect. But I came to the U.S. at a very young age. I was 2 years old. Thus, I sound more American than Irish. Went back to Ireland from the age of 8 through 15. And that's where, in a sense, when I lived in Europe, or primarily in Dublin, in my formative years, early teenage years, is where I became interested in architecture, coincidentally. I had the opportunity to live in Europe and see cities. My father was a film actor, so I traveled quite a bit with my mom and dad and my brother. And so I had the great opportunity to live in cities like Rome and Moscow and Almeria in Spain and London, for that matter. So I was always intrigued by cities, loved them. I felt there was so much energy. I was always fascinated with the idea that these cities had these places like piazzas and places to go and to hang out and have your coffee. And I used to, of course, read the Herald Tribune in Europe when I was there. So in a sense, that was the formative kind of, in a way, set the platform for my interest in architecture, just being involved with cities. In addition to my dad, who studied architecture, had a degree, a Bachelor of Architecture degree, but didn't practice. So in an interesting way, he became a film actor. And I chose, through a combination of fascination of cities and architecture and the culture of urban cities, and so I chose to study architecture. I did start at a young age. I did my undergrad. My freshman year, I was 16 years old, and I went to Cal State University, San Luis Obispo for undergrad. My master's degree is at the Architectural Association in London. That's where I have my master's degree, MA in History and Theory. But that's part of my background. I lived a number of years in Europe, and I have been based in Los Angeles, quite obviously, since my late teens. So that's with the base here. My wife and I and kids go back to London and go back to Dublin quite a bit, at least twice a year. So I still feel my soul is Irish, but I sound an American.
I love it. Very diverse. That is like a very well put together resume as far as getting experiences. I was just curious, what type of films was your dad in?
Well, Lord, he did some films like RoboCop, which was way back in the late 80s.
Yeah.
He was the old man, head of the corporation, back in the late 80s. But it was he had a wonderful career. He was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor back in the 50s. Lost to Marlon Brando, so that's a good. That's fine.
No shame there.
On the waterfront, Marlon Brando deserted for On the Waterfront. So, but he was just a character actor, but he did Fail Safe, Home Before Dark. He did quite a few other films that were primarily in the 80s and 90s and 70s and 60s for that matter. Right. So, but character actor in the end. He was very much a very respected character actor.
Gotcha.
He kept busy.
And so he was a trained architect. So he had a degree in architecture, but obviously he didn't practice. He was an actor. But it sounds like some of that, if not a lot of that, passed on to you. And
I would have to say so. As I mentioned, because I was educated in Europe between the age of 8 and 15, I graduated very young. I was 15 years old when I graduated high school, but it was a European high school. So because I traveled quite a bit, as my dad would make films through Europe, I had two tutors, among others, but they placed me at grades a little bit higher than I frankly should have been. So when I graduated, I was so young, which goes to say, if you're a young, aspiring architect, or you're thinking about going to university and you're trying to figure out what to study, I have to say when I applied, I wasn't 100% convinced that architecture was my future. But I loved to draw. I used to sketch quite a bit. In fact, I used to make a few bucks by sketching neighbors' houses, among others. But so that's where I started. But this is a good discussion with regards to for students and potential, potentially studying architecture. So when I initially started, I just fell in love with the old days when I went to school. You had, of course, a drawing board and a parallel bar, and you had triangles. So it was more drawing. Right. And but I fell in love with that culture and that life of drawing. And but I did finally, at the end of my second year, I was fortunate to read this wonderful book by Louis Kahn, who was a great, very important American architect. And his work resonated with me. He was all about materiality and about clarity of ideas, and to see architecture as a work of consequence, that we as architects can do stuff that contributes back. And I feel like that's a very important role of an architect, that it's not simply designing buildings and create new forms. It's about recognizing that you bring artistry, but also understand that this is a complex art, because you have to design spaces to live in, to work in, and to play in. So it's a much more complex art than simply a canvas on a wall. You have to create a three-dimensional place for people to be uplifted. And that's why I say architecture should be a work of consequence. But also, this idea of a catalyst for change. I think you can create architecture which draws people in and inspire them to be better by creating good spaces.
Right. There's so many important points you just hit on, but the last one, I think it's one of the things that we really, really want to get across to students. And hopefully this thought excites you, which is a career in design is an endeavor, right? A lifelong pursuit. I've even heard it said, you're not even really an architect until you're 40. I don't know who said that. But,
you could even consider that late 40s.
So late 40s. Okay.
I think that comes down to when, as an architect, when you have your own practice. I started my practice at the age of 28, 29. So as a result of that, you find that clients are willing to hire you. But if you're 30 and they're 45 years old, they have a certain reservation. But as you have a portfolio behind you and you build ideas and they can see that they've been successful, the opportunities become more, as you say, when you're 40s and 50s. Right. So it's a long term. In a way, you have to be passionate about it. You have to, as you say, to choose architecture, you have to love it. Right. It's not the ideal profession if it's something that you don't have that interest. And I always be a little bit reserved about using the term passionate, because you can say that about everything. Right. But I think with architecture, you do have to find that one thing that gets you up every morning and excited to go and draw and to think about things. And the complexity of architecture is you have to envision it created from paper, and that it has to have all the information to be able to build it. Right. It's an interesting concept. You, in a way, are a visionary as an architect, because it does not exist. You create it in paper, and hopefully what you draw gets built correctly. Exactly. And that's the challenge. But you do need to be committed to design. In a way, you have to be an idealist to think that design is an important component of buildings, because quite obviously most buildings you see are not really brushstroked by architects, and they're not really designed by architects. They tend to be more of the kind of run-of-the-mill buildings. But when you see architecture, you know it's architecture.
Right. So I'm curious because you've mentioned sketching a couple times, and I know, I remember my dad worked for Autodesk in 1996, and I remember him bringing home. We were not architecturally trained at all, and he came home and we were designing the front, the garden in the front lawn, doing it using a CAD program, and he thought that was so cool. Right? It was just like, this is technology,
yes.
like the birth of the internet. Students now are being born in the 2000s. They've grown up. I mean, we're literally teaching them Revit. Like this is what they've grown up with. How much do you see a fall off in sketching at all from your younger folks?
That's a really interesting question. I'm actually a teacher as well. It's my 11th year teaching grad studio at USC. I spent 8 years at SCI-Arc, teaching both grad and undergrad. And I also taught at the AA in London for a number of years. So I've had over 25 years of teaching, which I'm doing now. I'm getting a little bit tired now, but all through that process, I've seen the evolution from the early years at SCI-Arc, where it was about making things and sketching and drawing, to the advent, of course, computer and early programs like MicroStation and other types of programs through Maya, Rhino, Illustrator, and all the others to Revit right now. I believe that there was an argument that architecture was going to become a paperless profession, and I believe that's thrown out. Architecture is about where ideas come from, whether it's a model, or you discover an idea through working a program, digital program, or you're sketching. I do all of it, and our practice does all that because it's about ideas, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. That's ultimately the goal, is you're building ideas. So why consider that the only avenue one can take is digital when you may discover a wonderful idea through a sketch?
Right.
Or building a model. So I believe over the years, it has changed significantly now. There's a rejection of this idea of a paperless architecture, meaning that's digital, and sketches are not obsolete. In fact, one of my friends, my colleagues in Mexico City, Tatiana Bilbao, takes the position that she only sketches now. And that's a complete rejection of it. And you could double check that. But my understanding is that she's passionate about drawing and sketching, as I am. And I think that's awfully important because even drawings, in a way, when you sketch and you draw, it tells a bit about yourself, but also the soul of what your idea is. Whereas sometimes when you go digital, you're looking at, Rhino, or you're looking programs like that, it becomes so realistic. And that seems to be the obsession. How realistic can you make this rendering?
Right.
Well, to me, I don't buy that idea. I am convinced that it's good to work with those programs if they're trying to solve something. But I believe ideas are embedded in sketching, models, and digital studies.
Right. I love it. There's a lot there. And I'm hearing that, I think, from folks in positions like yourself. I'm hearing that. In fact, a thought that comes to mind, a gentleman that used to be on the board of the foundation, Doug Tom, he's got TEF Design up here in San Francisco. He told me, he said, I want to see, if you're a designer and I'm looking to hire you, I want to see your drafts. I want to see your crumpled up drafts on the floor. And that's so much easier to show you if I've hand sketched something. Right. And I've heard that echoed. So get out of design for a second. Seth Godin, who's a famous marketer and writer, he said people would come to me and say, I have writer's block. And he'd say, show me your bad writing. Right? Show me your bad writing and then we can get to good writing. But if you can't show me that, I don't know how you got there. And so that kind of bring it back to sketching a little bit, right? There's just, it's kind of having, pen and paper. It shows you the iterations of how you got to certain places.
Right.
I like that. I like that a lot. If we were pivoting just a little bit, since you're somebody who opened his own practice, can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what it was that made you want to do it, first of all, and then just kind of the experience, especially the early years?
Absolutely. My early years, I worked for a number of prominent larger firms. Both had won the Pritzker Prize, which of course is like the quote unquote Nobel Prize of Architecture. So my first job was another Irish architect named Kevin Roach. He had a great firm called Roach Dinkler Associates. I was a great late modernist who did great work in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I spent a few years there, 2 to 3 years, and then there was this wonderful opportunity to join I.M. Payne Partners if I was to land that job to work on the Louvre Museum in Paris. So I did end up getting that job. So I left Hamden, Connecticut at Roach Dinkler, and after 3 years, joined the Louvre team as part of the design team. Of course, I was one of the youngest, so I worked 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I felt that was very important when you're a young architect to show your commitment. So I did work on the Louvre for about 3.5 years, both in New York and Paris. What happened then was I had just spent now 5-6 years in my early years as an aspiring architect working for larger firms, of which both won Pritzker Prizes when I was working for both firms. Of course, I was the reason, a 21-year-old who was building models in the corner. Of course not, but I love to say that. I then subsequently took 2 years off from architecture to be an artist in New York. I was a painter. And then I draw an interest in Stephen Hall early when he was a young architect. So I joined Stephen Hall Architects, and that was my last job before I started my practice. Stephen was very important because there were only 4 of us, and Stephen Hall, I believe, a very, very strong, wonderful designer, very much an idealist, and very passionate about architecture. So I spent over 3.5 years working with Stephen in New York, and we collaborated on a house here in Los Angeles when he started running out of work. So I was in LA working on 2 commissions here with him. They were actually my clients, but since Stephen was kind enough to hire me 3 years or 2 years before that, I wanted to reciprocate and give him an opportunity to work on these houses I was doing out here. And ultimately worked out well. And sadly, it never got built, the house I was doing with Stephen. The clients chose to sell the property, but Stephen went on to great achievements. So I chose to stay in Los Angeles. So that's how I ended up being here. We got 2 commissions through my colleagues and friends here in LA, because I was from LA and Stephen was from New York. So that's how I ended up here. I ended up being here working on houses with Stephen Hall, and then he quite obviously subsequently went back to New York and created all the great work he's done. So I started getting commissions here in Los Angeles, and that's how I started. It was, in one sense, it was this kind of path I took from Roche to Iron Paint Partners on the Louvre, larger scale, projects that I couldn't really connect with because they were so large, and I was one of 10 or 12 designers on those. But Stephen was very more hands-on projects I worked on. I was project architect of a number of his projects. So that gave me the confidence, having taken a project through construction at Stevens, to be able to start my own practice.
Gotcha.
So that was the key. Small firm, understand the ropes, understand how to communicate to clients, learn how to wear many hats, not only getting the landing the commission, but being able to design it and being able to communicate with contractors and communicate with city officials. All that is what you need to do to start your own practice. And I believe I learned a lot from the time I spent with Stephen.
Gotcha. And so if we fast forward now, it's been 25, 26, 27 years that you've been going. What does it look like today in terms of how your role and how that's changed and the growth and whatnot?
It's interesting. As I've grown, when I started, I might have 3 to 5 projects if I was lucky. I have over 45 projects now, a variety of scales, from cultural buildings. We work with Nike, we work with Disney. We work with a significant amount of nonprofit companies like Clifford's Housing for supportive housing, homeless housing projects. We work with Skid Row Housing Trust, also supportive housing. So there's a variation between working with certain types of brand companies, but also in a sense, the most important work we're doing is also providing and getting people off the streets. So we have over 8 projects at different stages of drawings and also under construction or completed. And they are affordable housing or homeless housing. So that's a core part. In addition to that, we work with a number of the types of projects for doing a museum in Detroit. We're doing a number of cultural projects here in Los Angeles. We just landed a few days ago a dance department in Chapman University, which is a really exciting project where we get to work with, again, the artistry of dance. And can architecture celebrate dance? That's kind of the theme of what I was pushing. And so we were pushing that idea collectively as a team, and we landed the project. So great. It's fun to be an architect when you get to work with wonderfully interesting people. And that's plays a big role.
Yeah, no, I bet it's fun to be able to really go after things. You said passion earlier, right? And passion, it's kind of an overused word, but it's the truth. I mean, things that we enjoy doing, right? There's a lot to waking up in the morning and really enjoy what you do, right?
I would not like to be 29 years old and looking at the end game. I would love to be able to be 59, 60, and in the throes of a career,
right?
Which keeps you energy, keeps you young. And I think to have a full life and to be active and to be producing architecture and leaving buildings that are solutions or designs that can live 30 to 50 years after you're gone is a really interesting concept, that you make your mark that way.
Right.
So the idea that one can build on one's experience and build on and refine one's design approach over years is quite interesting. It means you're busy for 40 years instead of just this 10-year window.
Right. Now, I've heard stories. I mean, it is very common for designers to go into their 60s, 70s. I've heard 80s. I want to say I've even heard of a designer who his projects were churches. He was a very religious man. And in his 90s, he was still designing churches. Right. And obviously that just lines up. That makes very much sense. You know, it matters deeply to him. Right.
It doesn't, you know, it's just the nature of the profession. That your opportunities come when you're a little bit older, like exactly what you said in the early.
Right.
You really get going in your 40s.
Right.
So then you have a window of 20 years, but then you're mid 60s when you're still in your primes. And that's just an interesting concept that why not? Why can't you have a full life and being able to look to the future as opposed to having to look back at that? Well, those were the days when I was 29 years old, and, you know, being retired, and you know, it can be challenged that way. But no, it's all good. It's you have to love it, and that's why I say, you know, follow your dreams in architecture. I always encourage potential students who are interested in pursuing architecture is to be open to different architects and other types of designers you like. Mm-hmm. And if you are aligned with one type of architecture versus another, that tells a lot about yourself and what interests you. Mm-hmm. So it's always good to look at architecture and look at designers in a sense, because it tells a lot about yourself. If you're having to be a contemporary architect or someone who's passionate about restoration or passionate about other things, that's great. But it's all out there. So the more that students can align with what interests them, the better it is, because then they'll love what they're doing.
If we talk about leadership, right? So to own your own firm by definition is to be a leader. When you think about leadership in design, leadership in architecture, how have you learned that? Is it just kind of like the business of architecture where you just learn it along the way? Or do you have like a group of people and you just kind of bounce ideas off of? Was there a mentor?
I would say a combination. Absolutely. Okay. You need to wear many hats to be a leader. You need to be able to communicate, engage your employees, to be able to empower them, to give them opportunities. You have to be comfortable in your own skin as a leader so that you're not micromanaging everything. You have to trust people. People like to give opportunity. People like to have opportunities. They like to feel that they can get their teeth into something. Right. So you want to give those opportunities. And that's a leader. It's someone who recognizes one's strength, but also knows that your strength can be supplemented by other strengths of other people. Because architecture isn't how it used to be, where there was the individual with a cape and a hat and you were walking through a site. You have teams. And that's how it is. It's very much a collaborative process. I happen to be obviously the design principle to practice because that's my strength. I humbly think that as an architect, you need to try to refine your eye so that your decisions you make in terms of designing things is the right decision. And I think over the years, I feel more comfortable in my own skin and my ability to make those decisions. So I continue to do that. But we have a great group in our office from multiple people, from GSD, Harvard, to Princeton, to UCLA, to up in San Francisco, Berkeley, to all over the world as well. Great, wonderful aspiring architects and architects who join our practice because they believe that architecture is a social act, and they believe that the role of an architect is, as I said, to do work of consequence. So the wonderful people I have in my practice really celebrates that. And I'm so honored to have a great team at LOHA.
Love it. Absolutely love it. All right. Last question for you here. We always end with this one. What is the best advice that you could give to an up and coming design professional?
I would just say to be open-minded, to be curious, and to feel that if you choose a profession such as architecture, that it's an education of one's being. It's not simply a practice or a discipline, but you learn so much from when you're in this world of creativity that one does in the world of design. So if you see it as something that enriches you as an individual, you're in great shape. I know so many people who studied architecture and gone on to being involved with, film and other disciplines, but the nature of being a creative person or designer can be applied across the board and multiple, you can cross boundaries. Mm-hmm. But I do think for an aspiring designer is to continue to refine your skills as well, but to find something you love. That's the primary thing. You need to really seek that out, live your dreams to do that. And to do it means that you need to be curious. You need to be open-minded and to be able to see opportunities out there. And right. To be patient. Be patient. It's a long journey. And I can only say it's a good journey. I've never woken, since I started as a freshman at 16, I have never gone up in the morning not wanting to get into my office or go to an office to work. I loved it that much. And that's quite a few years. So I'm very, very, very happy with what I'm doing. And that's what one can only hope in life, is to actually enjoy waking up every morning and getting involved with the creativity and design world.
Absolutely. Well, that's a perfect place for us to leave it. Lorcan, thank you so much for taking the time. The foundation genuinely appreciates it. You have a great afternoon.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.